We continue now at the top of Daf Dalet and Beis and Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 84b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara is discussing, let's say a person takes a neder not to benefit from people. Are they allowed to benefit from Meiser Ani or not? And the Gemara says it's dependent on a machlokas tanoim with regards to demai. Let's say a person has demai, meaning they get this produce from an Amoritz. In general, it's a suffix whether the Amoritz separated the proper meisers. So the question is, do you have to designate Meiser Ani or not? Rabbi Eliezer says there's no need to designate Meiser Ani, and the Mishnah in demai continues, V'chachamim omrim, and the Chachamim say, Korei Shem, there is a need to designate Meiser Ani. However, ve'ein sarach lahafresh. However, you don't have to actually physically separate the Meiser Ani. The person just designates the Meiser Ani. The Mefarish here explains, V'chachamim omrim korei shem ve'in sarach la'afresh ela no seinena b'tzad zeh. He just looks at one side of the produce, at the pile of the produce. V'yomer, he says, Mikan ani notel, from here I'm going to take Meiser Ani, v'ochlehu ba'atzmo, but he himself can actually eat the Meiser Ani. Ta'amotzi mechaveru olav haraya, because a person wants to prove, when a person wants to take from somebody else, they need to bring evidence. D'yamar Yisrael lo'ani, because the Yisrael can say to the Ani, I see raya deloy frishu ha'ma'aretz v'yahiv nalach. If you bring a proof that the Amoritz didn't already separate the Meiser Ani, because again it's a suffix whether the Am Haaretz separated the Meiser Ani. So if you bring a proof he didn't, then I'll give you. Otherwise, I am going to take it. In any case, you have a machlokas here then by demai whether there's a need to designate Meiser Ani or not. And so the Gemara says as follows: My lav, is it not? And we're going to look at the girsa of the Bach over here. My lav, is it not? Lamanda Amar Sveiko Eino Tovel. According to the one who says that in a situation of doubt, it's not Tevel. What it really means to say is that in general, Meiser Ani, if there's Meiser Ani that wasn't designated, it's not considered to be Tevel. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. That's why Rabbi Eliezer says that there's no need to even designate the Meiser Ani, because Meiser Ani doesn't create Tevel. The fact that you haven't designated Meiser Ani does not mean that that entire pile is considered Tevel. So according to that Manda Amar Kasavar, that Manda Amar also holds less le tovas hana, that there is no tovas hana when it comes to Meiser Ani. Tovas hana meaning that you can decide which ani takes it. That's not true. If there's no tovas hana, it means any ani can come in and take it. It's basically considered full hefker. The kavan de less le tovas hana, and since there's no tovas hana, and again there's no tevel by Meiser Ani, those two things are related. So shari le lesayune, it's also leshanuye, it's also permitted for the person to benefit because it's complete hefker. So just because the person made a neder not to benefit from any people, they could still take Meiser Ani. The idea basically is Meiser Ani is complete hefker within the pile. Ulamad Damar Korei Shem. Now, according to the one, the Chachamim, that they say he does need to designate the Meiser Ani, Kasavar Sveiko Tovel, that Mandamar holds that the suffix of Meiser Ani within the pile does create a status of Tevel. V'chol Sveiko Tovel Isle Tovas Hanan. The general rule is that if something creates a status of Tevel, then there is Tovas Hanan, meaning you have the benefit of deciding which Ani should take it. V'lo Shari Le Lisayune. And if that's the case, if the owner can decide which Ani gets it, so if the person who made a neder not to benefit from so-and-so is going to take that Meiser Ani, they are benefiting from the owner, because the owner had the benefit of the discretion of deciding who to give it to or not, and therefore we're again saying that this machlokas tanoim over here, of whether you have to designate the Meiser Ani by demai, is going to be the same machlokas tanoim by a case of neder, whether the mudar hana is going to be allowed to take Meiser Ani or not. And the Ran over here explains, Kasavar Sveiko Eino Tovel. Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you have a suffix, whether there's Meiser Ani within the produce, it does not create Tevel. The Ran points out, Hu Adin Levada. The same is true if you certainly knew there's Meiser Ani within the pile of produce. Ela Mishum de Vesveik and Aktino Nakat Sveiko. It happens to be we're discussing Demai, which is a suffix, so we use the word suffix over here, but the same would be true in general. There's a general machlokis whether Meiser Ani creates Tevel or not. Now, once a person says that there's no tevel, kasavar leisba tovas hana, the same is true that there's no tovas hana. You can't decide which ani to give it to. The tovas hana betovel ve'eno tovel talia. The Ran says over here that tovas hana and tevel are actually dependent on one another. Pasuk is talking about things where you're going to in the future separate the trumas and maasros. The phrase lo yechalu sounds like it creates a status of tevel. The point is, the pasuk is saying when you have tevel, that's when the owners are the ones that need to separate and designate designate and distribute. Lomar shetovas hana shalahem, meaning to say, again, they distribute, they decide who to give it to. It's the same thing as writing that the owner decides who to give it to. And therefore, based on the phrasing in the pasuk, only when you have a situation of something that creates tevel, then we say there's tovas hana with the owner, and the owner gets to decide who to give it to. But if it doesn't create a status of tevel, then there's no tovas hana. And so therefore the Ran explains by Maiserani, if you hold it's not tevel, less be tovas hana, there's also no tovas hana. And therefore she's allowed, the one who makes the neder can benefit from Maiserani. To hefker bi'alma, it's just hefker, anyone can take it. But the Chachamim who say that it has to be designated, kasavar sveiko tovel, they hold that it's tevel. The mishamachi tzarich likros shem, that's why it has to be designated. V'chol she'sveiko tovel ispa tovas hana, and if you have a situation of tevel, you have a situation of tovas hana. It's included in the pasuk of v'lo yichalalu. Hilkach kevan d'isbe hana. Therefore, since there's hana over here, meaning to say again, there's tovas hana, asher l'sanuye demididei misani. It's going to be asher to derive benefit if you're muder hana, because you're getting benefit from the individual, v'lo me hefkera, and not from hefker. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya. Abaya says to Rav Yosef, Tekuli alma sveiko tovel. Really, in this Mishnah in Demai, everybody agrees the Maiserani does create a status of tevel. Rabbi Eliezer of Rabbanan b'hakam iflagi. And Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan, they're actually arguing about the following. Rabbi Eliezer savar lo nechshedu amei aretz al Maiserani. Rabbi Eliezer holds that amei aretz, they're not suspect when it comes to Maiserani. We assume the am aretz already gave the Maiserani. Kevan de'ilu mifkar nichsei v'haviani, and the reason is because in theory the am aretz could be mafkir all of his property. He could make everything he owns ownerless, and he himself would be an ani v'shakalei, and then he could take the Maiserani for himself v'shakalei hu. So less leip seda. So therefore there's no loss. So therefore we assume that he did separate or he did designate the Maiserani. For Rabbanan Savri, but the Rabbanan say no, nichse lo mifkerinish. A person's not going to make everything that he owns hefker in order to get Maiserani. Demirtus because he's afraid. Dilma zachibu in a shachrina. Maybe somebody else will get it during that time period when he made it hefker, and therefore that's not considered a solution to the Amoretz. Hilkach nechshedu. Therefore, the Amoretz, the Ameharetz are suspect when it comes to Maiserani, and that's why it's important if a person receives demai, the person does need to designate Maiserani. And the Mefarish explains, Amar le Abaya de Kulial Mosveiko Tovel. Everybody agrees Maiserani does create a situation of Tevel. V'hilkach, and therefore Masnisin de Lo Katani Maiserani, our Mishnah which doesn't say that the Muder Hana can take Maiserani, Divrei HaKoli. The Mishnah follows everybody. It follows both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. To Kevan de Sveiko Tovel, because since you have a situation of Tevel here, Bevade Yisbe Tovas Hana, you also have a situation of Tovas Hana, and the owner has the discretion to choose which ani to give it to. That's why it's going to be a problem to derive benefit. Avol Braisa de Katani de Achlanami b'Maiserani lo Rabbi Eliezer v'lo Rabbanan. The way the Mefarish understands, according to this approach of Abaya, the Braisa which says that the individual whose Muder Hana can take Maiserani, that does not follow Rabbi Eliezer or the Rabbanan. And the Gemara continues, Rava Omer Rava says, and Rava is resolving the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Braisa. Our Mishnah implied that a Muder Hana is not allowed to derive benefit from Maiser Ani, and the Braisa said a Muder Hana can derive benefit from Maiser Ani. And so the Gemara says, Kan b'Maiser Ani hamischalik b'soch habayis. Our Mishnah is talking about a situation of Maiser Ani that's being distributed within the person's house. D'chsiva Bey, there it says in the pasuk Nesina, it says that the owner gives it. They have the discretion to decide which Ani receives. V'nosata la'levi la'ger v'gomer. The pasuk says that you're going to give it. Mishum hachi asr le'lisanuy, and it's for that reason that it's prohibited for the Muder Hana to benefit from that Maiser Ani, because that's benefit from the owner. But over here in the Braisa where it says that the Muder Hana is allowed to benefit from Maiser Ani, that's talking about Maiser Ani hamischalik b'soch hagronos. That's talking about Maiser Ani that's being distributed in the granary. Kevan d'chsiv Bey, because since the pasuk says v'hinachta b'sharecha, you're going to leave it. It's basically hefker for anyone to take. So shari leilis hanuye. So for the Muder Hana as well, it's mutter to benefit. And so essentially, Rav is saying that by Maiser Ani, sometimes there is tovas hana and sometimes there is no tovas hana. It depends at what point in time it's being distributed to the aniyim. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Kohanim u'Leviim nenin li yitlu v'chulu. It said, let's say the person says Kohanim and Leviim, they're not allowed to derive benefit from me, so they can take the matnas kahuna that they're entitled to, that they can take against his will. And the Gemara says, Alma, we see from the Mishnah, Tovas Hana, ain't a moment that the Tovas Hana that the person has in general, he decides, let's say, which Kohen to give the matnas kahuna to, that's not considered to have any monetary worth, and that's why the Kohanim and the Levium, they can just take for themselves these items, and they're not considered to be deriving benefit from the person, because Tovas Hana is not considered mammon. But let's see the end of the Mishnah. Kohanim elu uleviim elu nenenli. If the person says these particular Kohanim or these particular Leviim are not allowed to get benefit from me, so then yitlu acherim. So then other Kohanim and Leviim are the ones who should take the matnas kahuna. Avalahani lo. But to these particular Kohanim and Leviim, it's going to be forbidden because they're not allowed to derive benefit from the person. Alma tovas hana mammon. And we see from that part of the Mishnah that the benefit the person has of deciding which Kohen should take the matnas kahuna, that it is considered to have monetary value, and therefore they are not allowed to take. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hoshia says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Ha-Rebbe v'ha-Reb Yossi b'Reb Yehuda. These two parts of the Mishnah is actually a machlokas tanoim. One case we're following Rebbe, and in the other case we're following Reb Yossi b'Reb Yehuda, as follows, the Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa. Hagonev tivlo shel chaveru. Let's say a person steals tevel from his friends, v'achlu, and he eats the tevel. Mishalim lo dmei tivlo divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says he has to pay him the value of the entire thing that he ate, the whole tevel. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says no. Eina mishalim ela dmei chulin shabo. He only has to pay him the value of the chulin within that amount which he stole, but that part which he was going to give anyway to Kohanim and Leviim, that amount he doesn't have to pay anything. And so the Gemara says, "My lab b'hakamiflagi." Aren't they arguing about this exact issue? Question of whether or not tovas hana is mammon or not. Therefore, there's a question: do you have to pay for the entire amount, the whole tevel, or do you only have to pay for the value of the chulin? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Aleph.